Today, I'm going to be showing you my art process from start to finish. I have two types of art that I do on a regular basis, drawing and painting, and my process for both aren't really very different from each other, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be showing you the process of making a Zentangle drawing, and if there's something majorly different between a Zentangle drawing and a painting that I do, I'll mention it, but for the most part, it's the exact same process that I go through, so let's just get straight into it. I normally go into my art without having any idea of what I'm gonna do beforehand. So when it comes to choosing the size of a paper or the type of paper that I want to use, or even the type of canvas I want to use, I usually just choose what I want to choose, or if I have a scrap piece of paper that needs to be used, I'll use that. But on the rare occasion that I actually have an idea of what I want to paint or draw, then that decision becomes easier. So in this case, I really didn't have any idea of what I was going to draw beforehand, so I just went to my regular paper, which is Bristol board paper. And the Bristol board paper that I normally use is 9x12, but I didn't really want this drawing to be that big, so I just measured it out and I cut it in half. And that scrap piece of paper is going to go towards another drawing in the future. I try as much as I can not to waste any paper. I just don't like to be very wasteful. After I decide what paper or canvas I'm going to use, normally I'll put a border around my paper because I just really love the look of borders. Honestly, at this point in my art, it's very rare that I don't do a border around my paintings or drawings. Most of the time I'll measure my borders with a ruler because I want the lines to be very clean and I want the same spacing on each side. But sometimes I'll just have a very messy border if that's the look I'm going for. And as for my paintings, I don't measure out my borders with a ruler. I just take my masking tape and I tape it on each side with one layer of masking tape. And if I want a bigger border, I'll do 1.5 or 2 layers of masking tape. And for my paintings, to make sure that I have very clean lines, if I'm using a white canvas, after I put my masking tape on, I'll paint over the masking tape with white paint so that when I actually go in and do my painting, the bleed through will only be the white layer. I don't know if that's very well known by all painters that if you put masking tape, you should do a layer of white paint underneath so that there's less bleed through. If you didn't know that, there's a fun tip for you. So after I have all of my lines measured out and drawn with a pencil, I'll go over that with either a fine liner or a Sharpie. It depends what I'm feeling for that particular drawing. For this drawing, I chose to do it with a Sharpie because I just wanted thicker lines. And this might be a weird thing, but it's helpful. Whenever I use a ruler with a Sharpie or a fine liner, I'll always run my finger along the edge of the ruler after I use the Sharpie because sometimes the ink goes onto the edge of my ruler, and when I move it around my paper, it can smudge. It's happened to me so many times before that at this point, I just have to clean my ruler in between every stroke. And if you're the type of person that lifts your ruler up and doesn't slide it across the paper, I don't think this will be a problem for you, but I definitely slide my ruler across the paper and it smudges all the time. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention is sometimes before I draw the border with my Sharpie or fine liner, I'll do my drawing first because I want a little bit of my drawing to overlap the border, not completely, but just slightly, and then I'll draw the border in between my drawing just to add that little bit of interest to my drawing. I don't do this all the time or even very often, but I just thought it was worth noting because I do that sometimes. So after drawing the border, if I don't have an idea already of what I want to draw, I'll spend a little bit of time trying to figure out which patterns I want to do. Normally, I don't think of what I want to draw until after I draw my border because it just gets me in the spirit of drawing and in the spirit of doing art. And sometimes the ideas just come super naturally, but other times I spend a couple of minutes, half an hour, maybe even close to an hour trying to figure out what patterns I want to draw, trying to figure out the composition of the piece. And sometimes the ideas come to me just by thinking of it, but other times I do need to go and look at my pattern books and look at my past art, which is what I did for this drawing. So I have my sketchbook where I draw the patterns that I've learned over the years, and then I'll also bring out my iPad where I have all of my digital drawings, and most of the time I'll choose a couple of patterns to go with. So in the case of this drawing, I chose 3 different patterns to go with, and as soon as I chose the patterns, the idea just kind of came to me of what the composition would be, and I went with this fish looking shape because the patterns that I chose reminded me of coral and scales and just in general looked very oceany. And for my painting, paintings, if I don't have any idea of what I want to do yet, normally I'll just choose a random color, start putting paint on my canvas, and it just happens. My thought process is very weird. It's honestly just, oh, I like this color. I feel like using this color today. Let me do a layer of this. Oh, you know what's gonna look good on top of that layer? This color and this technique of painting. It's really all over the place and it's hard to explain. So then comes the drawing. This is pretty straightforward. I put on a podcast or a show while I draw. I normally don't like to draw with complete silence. I have ADHD, so I can't really keep my brain quiet. A lot of times I'll just put on a show or a podcast where I can turn off my brain, not something new that I'm watching where I have to actually concentrate on it, because a lot of times when I'm drawing or painting, I'll get hyper focused on it. Time just flies by. I don't realize what I'm doing, what's going on. I'm kind of on autopilot and I'm like insanely focused. And that's honestly, for me, that's a sign that I'm still really loving art, because if I didn't love what I was doing, I would be overthinking about it. That's just not a good sign for me. And that's when I know I have artist block, is when I'm thinking about my art too much and struggling with it too much and struggling to continue with a drawing. Oh, and another thing I didn't mention, sorry, this is all over the place. Normally at the beginning of my drawings, I'll go in with a pencil and I'll map out where I want each pattern to go. So for this one, I started with a fish shape, and then you'll see me writing numbers down in each area of my drawing. So in this case, I wrote down 2 9s and a 5. That's just an indication of which pattern I have to use, because in my pattern book, I number each of my patterns. It just makes it easier for me to keep track of what I'm drawing where, because when I do get into that hyper focus mode, it's hard for me to remember what I wanted to do. I don't want to risk the drawing not looking as good just because I have a shit memory and I forgot which pattern I was gonna do. And especially with bigger drawings, it helps me keep track of what I'm gonna do. Like in 2020, I did this giant drawing for my living room that took me like over 50 hours to do over the course of like a month, and it had so many different sections in it and so many different patterns. If I wouldn't have done this technique where I map out my drawing and I number each section, I would have gotten really overwhelmed because I wouldn't have known what I was doing and when. It just helps my brain focus and stay on task. And obviously that's not the case for my paintings. My paintings are a little bit more loose and flowy. I see in the moment what I feel like doing, because I can't really number out each section of my painting. That's not the style that I go for. So yeah, now we're just in the thick of it. I'm getting insanely focused, and obviously with filming my art, it's harder for me to get into my hyper focused mode because I have to constantly be moving around my cameras, and now I'm trying out different angles, trying to make my videos look good, so it's harder for me to get insanely focused on my drawings, but not impossible. I also have to think about layering. So you wouldn't think that a Zentangle drawing would need layers, but for example, with this drawing, I knew that I wanted that fish shape with that bead type pattern to be the top layer. So I drew that first. It's kind of the opposite of a painting. So for that, the layer that you want at the bottom, you'll have to draw that first, because then it gets covered up by other layers of paint. But for my Zentangle drawings, the layer that I want to be on the top, that's what I have to draw first, because it's easier to draw the top layer first, and then the bottom layers I'll just draw around the top layer, rather than draw the bottom layers first and figure out where to leave it blank for the top layer. I don't know if that makes any sense. It makes sense to me. So yeah, I just forgot to mention that at the beginning. That's another thing I have to think about when I'm drawing. So this is something that I normally do at the complete end of my drawing. This is usually the last step of the drawing process for me, which is outlining a pattern. I think I did it now because I knew this was going to be the only pattern that I had to outline. So then I started working on the second pattern, which is the one that looks like fish scales. There's not really any reason to why I did this pattern next. I could have done the other one next because the layer that I wanted on the top was already done, and the last 2 layers are separated by that first layer. But if it was a different drawing where the second and third layer were touching each other, I would have had to think about which layer I wanted above the other one. And then, you guessed it, I started working on the third pattern. Okay, so this part is going to be a little bit confusing. I've already tried to record this like 3 different times, but it's so hard to explain. Hopefully I get it right this time. So after I finish my drawing completely, I try to take as high a quality of a picture as possible with my phone. I don't take the picture with my DSLR camera because I'm not very good with figuring out the settings and everything. I still have to learn everything there is to know about cameras, and it's really hard. So to make it a little bit more simple for me, I take the picture with my iPhone, and I couldn't show this because I'm recording with my phone, so I can't really take a picture and record at the same time. And we're finally done the drawing. I normally end off my drawings by signing them, but before I sign my drawing, I always practice my signature because I don't want that first attempt to be on the actual drawing. Anyway, after I take the picture, I airdrop it to my iPad, and then I go into Procreate and I click photo and I add the photo as a canvas. I'm just doing this so that I can go into the settings and look at the canvas details. So I go into canvas info, I click on dimensions, and I can see what measurements my canvas is, and this gives me an idea of the quality of my picture. So in this case, it's 356 millimeters by 232 millimeters. And I take those measurements and I convert them into inches. So now that I know the dimensions that I'm working with, I can delete the first canvas and I can make a new canvas that I now know needs to be 9 by 14 inches. And no, that's not a completely accurate measurement to what the millimeters were, but normally I'll just try to round it out so that it's not a wacky number. And if I decide to make this drawing into a print, it'll be a nice number. And okay, here's more confusion. The digital version of this drawing is bigger than the physical version of this drawing because that's the resolution of the picture that I took. I always make my digital canvas as big as it can be so that when I have to print it out, the quality of the picture, even if I print it smaller, will still be good. So after I create my canvas, I'll add my picture in and I'll spread it to the dimensions of the canvas. And to make sure that my borders are aligned properly, I'll add a drawing guide. I'll size it to what I need for the drawing, and I'll try to align the edges. And if you're watching this video for information, please take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt because, as I explain later on in the video, I haven't actually sent my art to any printing companies yet because I haven't found a good one in Canada. So this is just what I'm doing in preparation to make prints in the future, and I'm learning through trial and error. So maybe I'll make another one of these videos in the future when I actually have made prints so that I can explain this process better. After that's done, I'll go in and I'll adjust the brightness. If it's a Zentangle drawing that's black and white, I'll turn down the saturation all the way, and then I'll just see what else needs to be edited. In this case, some of the lines needed to be cleaned up. I needed to add a little bit of sharpness so that my lines wouldn't seem as foggy, and go in and clean up some splotches that were left by my fine liners that I can't really control in a physical drawing. And that's pretty much it for my Zentangle drawings. They're pretty simple to edit, but for my paintings that I use color in, that's a little bit different. I'll try to edit the saturation in a way where it's more true to the drawing in real life because sometimes the picture can dull out the colors a little bit. I'll add a little bit of sharpness and make the digital version of the drawing as true to the original as possible. And sometimes I'll tweak it a little bit to make it look a little bit more clean, similar to the Zentangle drawings. If there's some splotches, some places that I don't like, if there's some smudges that I don't want, I'll take those out. But other than that, I try to keep it as true to the original as possible while making sure it's gonna look good in print format. So that's most of the process of making a drawing or a painting for me. Now, normally with the picture that I edited, I would post that on social media, which I'm still gonna do. And I would also use that picture to list my art on Etsy when I was selling my original art. But recently I decided that I'm gonna stop selling my original art because I find that's one of the hardest parts about doing art as a job is that I would have to sell my art and then I would never be able to see it physically again. Because now I feel like I've gone through the process of learning art and finding my style, which I'm always gonna be finding my style. It's always changing, but I've gone through the big chunk of it in the beginning and I'm finally starting to make art that I'm proud of and that I actually like. So that just makes it 10 times harder for me to let go of my paintings and my drawings. So what I decided to do is I'm gonna make prints instead and sell those. I still haven't found a website that I like to make my prints because I live in Canada and a lot of the websites that you hear of that are popular only ship to the States because they're American companies. So I've been doing my research to find a good company in Canada that I I trust and that will actually make good quality prints. Hopefully it won't be too much longer before I can actually list some prints on my Etsy, but yeah, that's what I'm in the process of. So I just wanted to let you know that, because that part of my process is very different than what it used to be, and I can't exactly show you guys that because I haven't really done it yet since I haven't found a website. So for now, this drawing is going to stay in a safe place until I find a way to display it, because that's a part of the reason why I want to keep my original art, is to display it in my studio. And then maybe eventually, once I start getting overwhelmed with the amount of art that I have, then I'll start selling some of my originals. But for now, I just want to keep the ones that I really, really love and display them where I can see them every day and get inspired by them. So that's it for this video. If you want to support me in my art, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can like and share the video, but honestly, just watching it helps out a lot. I'm actually working on getting 1,000 subscribers right now. That's my goal. And like I said before, I have an Etsy. I don't have a lot of stuff listed up there right now because I am working on making prints. And I also have a Patreon that you could subscribe to. That would also help me out. They also just made now a free feature, so you don't have to pay anything just to subscribe to me. And I'm working on every once in a while giving some freebies on my Patreon. Obviously, it's not going to be every single week or every single month, but maybe sometimes I'll put up an extra mandala that somebody can download, or a Zentangle, or even early access to some of my videos. I'll try to do that every once in a while, or maybe I'll have something completely different just for my free subscribers. Anyway, oh, I also have a coloring book. God, I have so much stuff out right now. I also have a coloring book available on Amazon. Two coloring books. Oh my god. Restart. On my Patreon, if you're subscribed to a certain tier, you'll have all of my coloring books that are already out and all my coloring books that I'm putting out in the future available for you to download. But if you don't want to subscribe to my Patreon and you only want my coloring books, you can go and get those on Amazon. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Oh my god, I need a nap.